My name is Samantha, and I don't say this to start off pompous or fancy, but because I want to at least once make a statement about myself and not just be Mr. and Mrs. Johnson's youngest daughter, or that free aunt who is always on hand if you need to babysit. Because that's exactly what my family sees. I'm 30 years old and I work as a freelance accountant from home, and that sounds pretty decent, right? But as soon as I say it out loud to my family, they look at each other as if I'm telling a fairy tale. Because in their minds, I sit at home in my pajamas all day long and click through series after series, waiting for one of them to deign to call and throw me another errand. It's been like this for 2, maybe 3 years now, ever since I left the office, tired of corporate rules and endless meetings, and finally allowed myself to arrange my life the way I like. But try explaining that to my family. Sarah, the eldest, is 37, has 2 school-age children, and her life in the suburbs with all these soccer practices and parent-teacher conferences seems to her the most correct and respected. Emma, the middle one, is 33, and she is also settled, married, a 7-year-old child, a cozy house, a typical story about a proper woman. And me? I'm still not married, and it is this fact that turns me into an unpaid nanny, available 24 hours a day in the eyes of my family. My father does not hide his contempt for what I do. I don't understand all this computer nonsense, he threw in my face just a month ago, and I saw that he was not even trying to offend me. It was just the truth for him. For him, a real worker must get up at 6 in the morning, get into the car at 7, be in the office at 8, and return home only at 6 in the evening, when, according to him, you feel tired in the honesty of work. And I, therefore, cheat, play at being serious. I tried to explain that my clients depend on me, that I have real deadlines and tasks, that my work is not a game. But who listens to me? No one. Never. I generally grew up with this feeling that being the youngest means being superfluous. Everything I received was always second-hand. Clothes from Sarah, which had long gone out of fashion and had already lost their shape. Phones from Emma, first push-button ones, so ancient that it was embarrassing to show them at school, then outdated smartphones when they had already updated theirs. When I turned 16, I got a job at a local store, my first real job for the minimum wage, just so that at least once I could buy myself something new, not from someone else's closet. Sarah was already married then, Emma was in college, and I thought, maybe now I'll feel like an adult, independent. But how wrong I was. Mom said, "You have to give us half your salary, half of my minimum wage, because Sarah needs money for her wedding. And here you are, 16 years old with your first job, dreaming of buying yourself a dress, sneakers, whatever. But instead, half of your money goes to your older sister, who already has a job, a man, and plans. And you don't even argue because in families like mine there is one rule. Shut up and do as you're told. And here I am, 30, and still treated like I'm the same 16-year-old girl. Every weekend there is an excuse to dump the kids on me. Emma has a date with her husband, Sarah has a break from motherhood, and the kids end up in my apartment. Just for the weekend, they say. But that weekend turns into a tiny nightmare for me. Yes, I love my nephews. They are wonderful, funny, but they are children. They are noisy. They demand attention every second. They constantly want to eat, play, argue, and all this in my small apartment with 1 bedroom and a study. When they spend the night at my place, I sleep on an air mattress in my study because the whole bedroom is occupied. And the most painful thing is not that I am tired, but how my parents look at all this. In their eyes, Sarah and Emma are heroines, mothers deserving support and respect, and I am a parasite who should be grateful that she is trusted with the most precious thing, children. Mom always repeats, "You should be glad that they trust you with their children." Believe me, they simply have no choice. A free nanny is a free nanny. And so, Christmas was approaching, and for the first time I had other plans, real plans, other than another round of childcare. My friends Katie, Jen, and Mike had decided to rent a cabin in the mountains and spend a week at a ski resort. We had been discussing this trip for months, and for me, it was like waiting for a miracle, a real vacation that I had never had, because usually my life revolved around other people's children, other people's affairs, and other people's problems. And now, for the first time, I could allow myself to do something of my own, go to the mountains, ski, sit by the fireplace with a glass of wine, talk to people my age who would not ask me to warm up their milk or find a lost sock, and most importantly, not look back at other people's schedules. I began to work nights, closing projects one after another so that there would be no reason to cancel the trip. I pounded my fingers on the keys of the laptop until they hurt, just to finish everything earlier than I planned, because I knew that if I left even a small loophole, the family would definitely stick their nose in there and ruin everything. I bought myself a new ski suit, for the first time in my life a normal, bright one, in which I did not feel like a gray shadow, but a person, and a backpack, boots, thermal underwear, everything that I had never bought before, because I thought, why, if I am not going anywhere anyway? It was strange and incredibly pleasant to hold these things in my hands, to know that they were only mine, not hand-me-downs, not leftovers from my sisters, but my own purchases for my own future. Of course, I was worried about telling my family about this, because I knew their habit very well, to present any of my desires as a whim or a fancy, because your whole life is like a vacation. You sit at home. But I swore to myself that this time everything would be different, that I would say out loud that I have my own plans, and I will not allow them to be pushed aside for the umpteenth time for the sake of others' convenience. And then December came, the 24th, the traditional evening at my parents', when we all gather at the same table. I arrived in my old car, loaded with presents, because no matter what, I always tried to give everyone presents, even though I knew my gifts would not be as appreciated as expensive toys from Sarah or electronics sets from Emma. When I entered the house, only Mom and Dad were there. Mom was fiddling with the tree, hanging up decorations. Dad was sitting in a chair with a newspaper. "Where is everyone?" I asked, taking off my coat and looking around the empty living room. "Oh, well, you know your sisters," Mom answered, as if that said it all, and I just grinned, because I knew that her "will be here soon" actually meant in 3 hours. And so it turned out. Sarah was the first to arrive with Tom and the kids. The kids burst into the house like a hurricane, kicking off their boots right at the door, and immediately started running around, screaming, grabbing everything in sight. Then Emma showed up with her husband David and Tyler, and the house became so noisy that Mom couldn't hear the decorations on the tree jingling. Everyone's attention immediately switched to the kids, and I, as always, found myself on the sidelines. Finally, everyone sat down at the table. The smell of turkey mingled with their voices, and the conversation turned to the usual. Sarah had more office intrigue. Emma had parent-teacher conferences, sports clubs, all the same old stuff, as always. I sat picking at my food and waited for the very moment when I could get a word in and tell her about my trip. "So, Samantha," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off her phone, "how's your typing going?" She called my job typing, and every time I wanted to throw a plate at her, but I held back. "I'm fine," I replied, trying to smile. "Actually, I wanted to tell you all something," I began, but I could already tell that no one was listening. Sarah was tapping her fingers on the screen. Emma was cutting up food for Tyler. My parents were discussing football with Tom, and only I sat there with this sentence stuck in my throat. I sighed, waited for a pause, and tried again. "I have news about the holiday." And then Sarah suddenly looked up from her phone, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Oh, what a time," she said loudly, as if deliberately drowning me out. "I was just about to tell you that we're all going to Hawaii tomorrow." Everyone buzzed and smiled. Mom clapped her hands. Dad leaned forward with a satisfied look. Emma squealed with delight, and I realized that everyone knew all along except me. Sarah continued, "Yeah, me and Tom, Emma and David, Mom and Dad, all together for a week." Everything is booked, the hotel is paid for, the tickets are in hand. It's going to be amazing. And then my insides sank. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could barely utter the words. What about the kids? My voice was muffled, but everyone heard it. Sarah waved her hand as if shooing away an annoying fly. Oh, we'll drop them off at your place tomorrow morning before we leave for the airport. You don't mind, right? And before I could even answer, she added, just for a week. I heard that, just for a week, as if someone had read me a sentence. A week with 3 kids in my tiny apartment, when I should have been skiing and experiencing my first taste of freedom in years. I stared at her, the words just escaping me. You didn't even ask if I could or wanted to do this, if I was even available. Sarah laughed, so easily as if I'd said something stupid. Oh, come on, you're always available. You work from home. The words hit me like a slap in the face, like someone had doused me with ice water right there at the holiday table, where everyone had been smiling a second ago, and suddenly I was the thorn in the side. Always available was how it sounded, as if my life, my job, my plans didn't matter in the slightest, as if everything I lived could be erased in one fell swoop to make way for the convenience of others. I glanced around the table and saw my parents nodding as if this was actually normal, and Emma was already whispering to David about what to pack for Hawaii, and no one was even looking at me, as if I was nothing. I put my fork down on my plate and, feeling a storm building inside me, said firmly, no. The word hung in the air like a heavy bomb ready to explode, and the silence that followed was deafening. All I could hear were the children's squeals and laughter in the living room, their games, their little wars with their toys, and the contrast was so wild, as if we were in different universes. There, joy and carelessness, and here, icy tension, in which every second seemed an eternity. The silence was broken first by my mother, her voice cold and puzzled. What do you mean? No. I straightened up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. That's what I mean. I can't watch the children next week. Sarah's smile disappeared instantly. Her face tightened, and for the first time I saw anger in her eyes. Samantha, this is ridiculous. We've already booked everything. Flights, hotel, everything. I leaned forward and said, trying to keep my voice down, that's your problem. You should have asked me first, Emma interjected, her voice sharp and exasperated. Jesus, Samantha, you don't have anything else anyway. You work from home. And those words, they hit me harder than any accusation, harder than even the screaming. You work from home. Like it meant nothing. Like it wasn't a real job. Like my whole life was empty and a sham. I felt my blood boil like something was tearing at my chest. I have plans, I said firmly. What plans? Dad spoke for the first time all evening, and his voice was full of judgment. You never go anywhere. I could hear the contempt in those words, and it hurt so much I almost choked. To them, I was still that little girl, sitting in her room, playing at doing serious work that didn't really matter. I have my own plans for the holidays, I repeated, plans that don't involve babysitting. Sarah suddenly slammed her palm down on the table. The glasses shook, the wine almost spilled, and she screamed, "This is unbelievable! Do you realize you're ruining our entire vacation? We can't cancel this whole thing." I looked at her and asked, "Why? Why did you make all these plans without even asking me? Why should I have to fix your mistake?" Mom snapped back, her voice as sharp as a whip. "Because family helps each other." I almost burst out laughing, though the laughter caught in my throat and came out more as a cough. Family helps each other? When has this family ever helped me? It's not fair, Emma interjected, but her voice was shaking and I could tell she was nervous. We've always been there for each other. I turned on her sharply. When? When were you there for me? When I needed help moving? When I cried myself to death trying to keep my small business going? When I was going through a breakup with Jason and didn't know how to live my life? Where were you then? You were too busy living your own life. Dad interjected again, and his words hit me so hard that I felt my insides clench. No, Samantha, you're the selfish one. Your sisters work hard. They deserve a vacation. I clenched my fists. Does that mean I don't work hard? I don't deserve a vacation? I don't have that right? Dad looked at me with the same expression I'd known since childhood when he'd cut off any objections I might have. It's not the same thing, he said. They have families to take care of. You're alone. You don't have children. Your time is worthless. Those words cut through me like a knife. My mother tried to intervene. That's not what we're talking about. But I could see in her eyes that it was. Emma suddenly spoke desperately. Samantha, please. We really need this trip. The kids love spending time with you. I laughed bitterly. They love being here because I let them do whatever they want while I work. Do you know how many times I've had to redo projects because Tyler spilled juice all over the keyboard, or because your kids screamed so loudly that I couldn't concentrate on client calls? They're just kids, Sarah tried to justify herself. I hit her with words like a whip. Exactly. They're your kids, not mine. The room was so silent that I heard one of the kids laugh next door, a laughter that rent the air like a mockery of everything that was happening. Everyone looked at me as if I had grown two heads right before their eyes and suddenly turned into someone they had never met before. I can't believe you're doing this, Sarah said quietly, but with such venom that it sent shivers down my spine. After everything our family has done for you. I almost laughed in her face. What has this family ever done for me? Tell me one thing. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and then silence again. No one could answer. Not Sarah, not Emma, not Mom and Dad. They all just looked away, as if they had suddenly lost the power of speech. I raised my voice, feeling the anger that had been suppressed for so many years building up inside me. You gave me hand-me-down clothes that I wore until I was 18, even though I hated every single piece of clothing because it wasn't mine. It belonged to someone else. You made me give half my salary from my first job for Sarah's wedding, when I was 16 and working part-time in a store and dreaming of buying something for myself. You ignore everything I say about my life and work. You look at me like I'm some kid who needs to be thanked for a crumb from someone else's table. You treat me like I'm your personal nanny, and now I want to hear, what exactly did this family do for me? Mom's voice rose higher, louder, shaking with anger. We raised you. We fed you and clothed you. I raised my eyebrows and smirked. That's called parenting. It's what you're supposed to do. It's not a gift. It's not a feat. It's your responsibility. Sarah stood up abruptly from the table, her chair sliding back with a bang. Okay, if you feel that way, maybe you shouldn't come to family events at all. I surprised myself at how calmly I sounded. Maybe you shouldn't. Samantha, my mother warned, her voice low and menacing. Don't say anything you'll regret. I looked her straight in the eye and said, I'm not saying anything I'll regret. I'm saying I'm tired, sick to death of being treated like a servant instead of part of the family. That's not true. My father tried to interject, but he couldn't even meet my eyes. Really? I asked. When was the last time someone asked how I was doing? When was the last time anyone cared about my problems or my successes? When was the last time I was invited somewhere that didn't involve babysitting for free? There was silence, thick and heavy, punctuated by Emma's sob. She was crying now. You're ruining Christmas, Samantha. You're ruining everything, she sobbed. I shook my head. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just standing up for myself for the first time in 30 years. Sarah rolled her eyes and said through gritted teeth, That's ridiculous. We're not asking for much. It's just 1 week. 1 week, and I already have plans for it, I said. Mom cut in sharply. What plans? Tell us what's so important that you can't help your family. I looked around the table. Sarah was seething, her face twisted in anger. Emma was sobbing, wiping her tears with a napkin. Mom looked like she was about to explode. Dad was shaking his head with an expression of such disappointment that I wanted to scream. These people didn't want to know about my plans. They didn't care what my life was like. They just wanted to make sure my plans weren't important enough to interfere with their convenience. It doesn't matter what my plans are, I said. The point is, I have plans. And none of you even bothered to ask. That's all. So you're going to ruin our vacation because of some tantrum of yours? Sarah sneered. Hysteria? I felt a wave of rage rise up inside me. You call it hysteria because I said no for the first time in my life after 30 years of not speaking. I stood up from the table so abruptly that my chair tipped over backwards and grabbed my purse. Samantha, sit down, Dad barked, his voice thundering like an order. We're not done with this conversation. I turned to him, determination seething in my chest. We are. I looked around the table again. Their faces were filled with nothing but condemnation, anger, tears, and cold indifference. I told you I wasn't babysitting next week. That's final. Find something else. Samantha, Mom yelled as I headed for the door. If you walk out that door, don't expect to see us again. I paused for a second, turned around and said, okay. Because I'm tired of being the person who's only welcome when I'm needed. And with that, I walked out of my parents' house, slammed the door behind me, got into my car, and started the engine, my insides shaking and burning. By the time I got to my apartment, my phone was vibrating nonstop, ringing off the hook with missed calls and texts. But I didn't even look at it right away. I just plopped down on the couch, sat there, still in shock from finally doing what I had been afraid of my whole life. I had finally fought back, and although my hands were still shaking slightly, there was a strange mixture of horror and relief inside me, as if in one night I had torn down to the ground a huge wall that I had been building for 3 decades in a row, each time laying a brick of my obedience, my silence, my goodness. For 30 years I had been an exemplary daughter, the one you could always rely on, a reliable sister, always ready to lend a shoulder, even when she herself was barely standing on her feet, a woman who never caused problems and who could be ignored until her help was needed again. And now all this had collapsed in one night, like a house of cards, as soon as I said no for the first time. Finally, I picked up the phone, my fingers slid treacherously across the screen, and saw 7 missed calls. 4 from Mom, 2 from Sarah, 1 from Emma, and the messages were already starting to pile up, one after another, like a snowball. The first, from Mom. Your behavior today was unacceptable. Call me back immediately. The second from Dad. Samantha, you were being selfish. That's not like you. It's made your mother's blood pressure go up. Then from Sarah, I can't believe you did that to us. You're ungrateful and mean. Thank you for ruining our Christmas. Emma was not far behind. I cried for an hour because of what you said. How could you be so cruel? I stared at the screen, rereading each message, and I knew that even now, after that dinner, after what I'd said to their faces, they still didn't get it. They weren't mad at me for using me all these years, for treating me like furniture or free labor. They were mad that I had ruined their comfortable plans. There was no apology, no understanding, only accusation, only the usual, you owe us. I put my phone on silent, almost solemnly, and went into the kitchen. There was pizza left in the fridge, a piece of last night's dinner, and it became my sad Christmas table. I sat alone, chewing on the cold dough and cheese, and thought about how my family would probably be home at this moment, sitting in the living room, discussing what a terrible person I was, and maybe even laughing behind my back again. But you know what? For the first time in years, I didn't feel terrible about disappointing them. I sat alone, but inside there was no usual emptiness. There was a quiet fire burning, and this fire warmed me better than any dinner with those who think that your time and your life are worth nothing. I woke up early on Christmas morning, and the first thing my eyes fell on was the neatly laid out ski clothes and the packed backpack that I had packed a few days ago. Everything was ready. Warm pants, new boots, gloves that still smelled like a store, and a bright suit that I bought for the first time in my life just for myself. I remembered how many weeks I had worked nights, closing projects to free up time, How many times I had put money aside. How much joy there was even in the simple choice of equipment, because it was not for someone else, but for me. I was not going to let them ruin it. Before leaving, I sat down at the table and wrote a note on a plain piece of paper, writing each word firmly as if it were a contract signed in blood. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't just about 1 week of babysitting, but about all the years I'd been treated like an unpaid extension of their lives. I wrote, "I told you I couldn't babysit this week. I'll be in the mountains with friends at a ski resort until next Sunday. I'm tired of being your go-to babysitter and freebie whenever you need it. I'm tired of being treated like my life doesn't matter. As of today, I'm cutting off all contact with this family." I taped the note to the door, placed my hand on the paper like I was stamping it, and walked out. There was a car parked outside waiting for me with Katie, Jen, and Mike, my real friends, the ones who knew me without any masks. "You look different," Katie said as I climbed into the back seat, her eyes attentive and searching. "Very different," Jen added, smiling. "I finally told my family what I really think," I replied, my voice firm, even unfamiliar to me. "I told you," Mike chimed in. "It was time." "They've been kicking you around for years." The drive up the mountains took 2 hours, but it felt like time was stretching and flying at the same time. Every minute dragged on because I kept catching myself wondering, what if I'd made a huge mistake? What if I'd be left without a family forever? But at the same time, those hours seemed short because inside I felt an incredible relief, the joy of finally doing something just for myself. When we got to the resort and I checked into a cozy room with a view of the mountains, the first thing I did was turn on my phone again. The screen flickered, and the numbers almost knocked me off my feet. 53 missed calls, dozens of messages, even from Tom and David, my brothers-in-law, who usually didn't exchange more than a few words with me. I sat down on the bed, laid out my bag in front of me, and began to read. "Sarah, we can't believe you're actually leaving. Our trip to Hawaii is ruined because of your selfishness. Emma, come home right now. The kids are calling you Mom. Samantha, Marie, come home right now. You've ruined everyone's Christmas dad. Your nephews are standing outside your apartment crying. They don't understand why Aunt Samantha left them. You should be ashamed." For a second, I was overcome by a feeling of guilt, so nasty and sticky, as if someone had whispered in my ear that I had abandoned the most defenseless. The image of children crying at my door was terrible. It ate into my head and did not allow me to breathe. But then I suddenly understood a simple and cold thing. They still brought the children to me, even after I told them no. Even after I left the house, leaving behind a clear and firm warning. They did not believe me. They decided that I was bluffing, that this was another of my hysterics, that I would still give in at the last moment and stay to babysit, as always. I scrolled through their messages one after another, each one saturated with anger, resentment, confusion, and a demand that I come back. There was no regret in those words, no hint that any of them might be wrong to think that my life was empty and that I was always free. No one even tried to apologize. No one admitted that they had gone too far. And in that moment, something inside me clicked. I blocked all their numbers, deleted their voices and accusations from my life with one flick of my finger. And for the first time in many years, I had a week of complete, real peace. Katie, Jen, and Mike and I skied every day, and the cold mountain air seemed to clear my head more than any conversation. In the evenings, we dined in expensive restaurants, laughed, stayed up late, talking about everything under the sun except my family and their endless dramas. I didn't have to look back at someone else's schedules, needs, or eternal whims. Just me, just my life, my decisions. It was the best vacation of my life, and I felt it in every cell of my body. When I got home the following Sunday, my concierge stopped me right in the lobby, as if he were about to share a secret. "Miss Samantha," he said carefully, "your parents came in here several times this week, asking if you were home yet." Your mother seemed very upset. I thanked him and went up to the apartment, my heart pounding so loudly it echoed in my temples. The first thing I noticed was that the note was gone from the door, so they had definitely seen it. For about 5 minutes I felt uneasy, as if I had stepped on thin ice and didn't know when it would crack. I even allowed myself to think that maybe my parents had skipped their trip to Hawaii in order to babysit. But then I chuckled. They were grandparents, after all. A week with their grandchildren shouldn't be a problem. These were their children, their responsibility. Everything should be fine. 2 days after New Year's, I heard familiar voices in the hallway, footsteps that I had been both dreading and waiting for. I looked through the peephole and saw them all at once. Mom, Dad, Sarah, Emma, all standing at my door, and the sight sent a chill down my spine. This was it, the confrontation I had been waiting for and which could no longer be postponed. I took a deep breath, as if about to jump into cold water, and opened the door. My mother was holding my note in her hand, waving it around as if it were evidence in a court of law. "How could you do this to us?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "You let us down. Your selfishness made my father and I miss our holiday." "We had to cancel our tickets," Sarah added, her voice shaking with anger. "Do you realize how much money we've lost?" Emma was sobbing now, hiding her face, and her words were the same as I'd heard them 100 times. "The children keep asking where Aunt Samantha is. How could you hurt them like that?" They all spoke at once, their voices intertwining like taut strings, each slamming me with accusations: selfish, ungrateful, arrogant. That word, arrogance, was heard especially often, and I suddenly realized that in their understanding, standing up for yourself and refusing to carry their problems on yourself was arrogance. I stood in the doorway, not retreating, and listened to them pour out all their anger and disappointment on me, as if my apartment had turned into a courtroom. I let them speak out, breathe out everything they had been storing up against me, and only when they finally quieted down, I looked up and calmly asked, "Did you read the entire note?" Everyone looked confused, as if it was some new language. I repeated slowly and firmly, "Did you read the last sentence carefully?" They glanced at each other and then looked again at the crumpled sheet of paper in Mom's hand. "I wrote that I was cutting off all communication with this family," I said, and felt a thick silence fall in the hallway from my words, heavy and cold, like snow on a windless night. When none of them answered, a deathly silence fell, so thick and sticky that I thought I could hear someone else's clock ticking in the neighboring apartment. It was clear that one by one, the realization that I had said this was slowly and painfully dawning on them. "You didn't mean it that way." Mom was the first to break the silence, but now her voice was quieter, without the previous pressure, as if she herself did not fully believe her words. "I really meant it," I answered calmly and firmly. "You don't consider me part of the family. For you, I am a convenient person onto whom you can dump your responsibilities. For you, I am an unpaid nanny, and nothing more." "That's not true," Emma said, trying to shout over her own excitement. "We love you." I laughed, short and bitter, making her lips tremble. "You do? Really? When was the last time any of you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me out without requiring me to watch the kids? When was the last time you ever treated me like my opinion or feelings mattered?" No one could answer because we all knew the truth. It lay between us like a stone that couldn't be moved or hidden. "Samantha, please," Mom spoke again, and now her voice broke as she began to cry, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We're family." "Family sticks together," I nodded and said, "Yes, Mom." Family sticks together, but family respects each other. Family asks before they make plans that affect others. Family doesn't treat one person like they're their hired help. Dad finally intervened, his brow furrowed and his hands clasped behind his back. "We may have made mistakes, but you're overreacting." This is ridiculous, I felt anger rising inside me. Overreacting? My entire childhood, I've only had your scraps, your cast-offs, your attention, your resources, your respect, and only when it was convenient for you. For the last 3 years, I've been your backup child care provider without you ever asking me if I wanted the role. And you dare say I'm exaggerating?" Sarah stepped forward, wrapping her arms around herself. "Okay, maybe you should have asked about this week first. But you didn't have to disappear. You scared us." I looked her straight in the eye. "I made it clear in the note I gave you what I was getting at. I told you I wouldn't let you use me anymore." "Used?" Emma sobbed, her eyes red. "We never used you." "We thought you enjoyed spending time with the kids." I exhaled sharply and clenched my fists. "I enjoy spending time with them. But not every damn week. Not when I'm trying to work. Not when you think I don't have a life and other things to do." My mother was crying hard now, almost choking on her tears. "Please, Samantha, we can work this out. We can do better." And for a second, her words, her sobs, her look, all of it almost broke my resolve. For a moment, I wanted to step back, hug her, and tell her that everything would be the same. But then I remembered all those nights when I'd sat alone in my apartment and cried into my pillow because I'd been rejected, ignored, taken for granted, while I'd tried so hard to please everyone. I remembered feeling invisible in my own family, and that memory sobered me. "I'm tired of being the second-class part of this family," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. "I'm tired of being the one who always sacrifices for everyone else. I'm tired of being ignored unless I'm needed." "But we're your family," Dad said desperately. "That's what families do for each other." I looked at him and said sharply, mercilessly, "No, Dad. That's what I do for you. What have any of you ever done for me?" The silence fell again, heavy and relentless. Even they could no longer pretend that our relationship was equal, that I was wrong. I sensed the moment had come, and I said firmly, gesturing toward the elevator, "I want you all to leave right now." "Samantha, please," Mom began, but I cut her off. "Go away and don't come back." They stood there for another minute, confused, shaken, as if the world had just been knocked out from under them. Finally, they turned and walked slowly toward the elevator. Mom's sobs echoed down the hall until the doors closed behind them. After they left, I dialed the concierge. My voice was firm, but my hands were shaking. "Please don't let any more members of my family into the building," I said, and hung up, feeling like I could breathe deeply for the first time in years. For the next few weeks, the phone rang, and I found myself afraid to answer it, because I knew that on the other end would be people I had barely spoken to in years. Aunt Carol, who always put her foot in other people's business, Uncle Jim with his patronizing tone, my cousin Rachel, who usually didn't even think about me. They all suddenly came alive and began calling one after another, as if they had received orders from above. Everyone tried to convince me to make peace with my family. Everyone threw out phrases full of hints of guilt. Everyone tried to rub my nose in the fact that I had broken a connection that needed to be preserved. But I was not going to fall for this game anymore. I listened to their empty words just long enough to understand the direction of the attack, and then I simply hung up, without justifying myself, without arguing, without explaining. And then they went on the offensive in another way. My family began posting old photos on social media, pictures from my childhood in which I smile with holes in my knees, with pigtails and funny dresses, always someone else's, always inherited, and the captions under these photos were sticky and false. "I miss Samantha so much. I will always love you, sis." These were not memories. They were weapons carefully calculated to make me feel guilty, to knock tears out of me, to make me regret. I didn't react to anything. I remained a stone wall. My birthday came in March, and for the first time in years, I celebrated it exactly the way I wanted. We went to a nice restaurant, me, Katie, Jen, and Mike, and it was an evening without screaming children, without a scene with a disgruntled mother, without that sticky feeling that I had to please someone. We laughed, ordered expensive wine, talked about everything except the things that had been poisoning my life for so many years. No one made me feel guilty for enjoying my own birthday. When I got home that evening, the concierge handed me a large box, carefully tied with a ribbon. I opened it in my apartment and saw an expensive handbag, luxurious flowers, and a card with the signatures of all the family members. The same signatures that previously meant nothing except new demands and expectations. The next morning, I called the courier service and arranged for it to be delivered back to my parents' house. I didn't need their guilt-ridden gifts. 4 months passed. 4 months without unexpected calls asking to sit for a few hours. 4 months without drama, without being put down, without anyone treating me like my time was worthless. During that time, I began to feel alive, like a confident woman again. I took on bigger clients at work, raised my rates, and for the first time in a long time, felt valued. I even allowed myself to date men again without the fear that any evening would be ruined by a sudden, "we'll keep the kids." Without the constant stress of family obligations, I finally had the energy to live my own life. And then the letter arrived. A long, heavy letter from Sarah, written without her usual cool confidence, and I read it 3 times until the meaning cut through the layers of emotion. She wrote that the whole family was sorry about what happened at Christmas, that they had talked about it over and over at every family dinner since, that they realized they were wrong. She acknowledged that I had been ignored, that I had been taken for granted, that my wishes and feelings had been treated as if they didn't matter. She acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly. She wrote that the children missed me, that they asked about me all the time, and that she missed me too. I held that letter in my hands, rereading it, and for the first time since it all started, I felt like someone in my family had truly understood how they had hurt me, and had the courage to say, "I'm sorry." Part of me responded immediately, because I missed the children too, their laughter, their genuine hugs that the adults in our family never gave. Part of me wanted to believe that they could change, that all of this was worth it. But the other part of me, the part that had just learned to breathe without the suffocating pressure of family, was reminded of how good those 4 months had been, how peacefully I had slept, how whole I felt for the first time in years. I thought for 3 days, and every thought tore me apart. Finally, I wrote a short response. I said, "I'm not ready for reconciliation yet. I need more time to figure out if I want you back in my life, and if so, what that would look like. When I'm ready, I'll get in touch. Please don't text me again." Until then, I hit send and felt relief, real relief, like I'd taken off a heavy suit of armor. I wasn't going to slam the door shut forever, but I wasn't going to throw it wide open either. Not yet. I live by my own rules now. I laugh with friends who really care about me. I date who I want to, not who I have to. I go on vacation without asking permission. I work with clients who value my expertise, not use my time. I only keep in touch with a few relatives who have stood up for me. Aunt Carol stopped pressuring me and said she understood. Cousin Rachel once wrote, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." Do I sometimes miss my family? Yes, I do, especially my children. But you know what? I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss being taken for granted. And I certainly don't miss living a life where I was just a convenient tool.